Retro.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Padme Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars. And wow, 1,000 episodes of Podcast Stardust? Whoa! I guess the Force is strong with this one. Congratulations, Jay and Dennis.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley. Jay Krebs normally joins me for the introduction, but this is a replay of an old episode, so I'm doing this introduction solo. If you're on spring break, we hope it's going great, and if you've had spring break, we hope it was wonderful. And if you don't get a spring break, well, hang in there. We'll be getting to summer before you know it. As I've mentioned several times lately on the podcast, March has been a really busy month for us, and our schedules aren't allowing for as many new episodes as we would like. With that in mind, we figured this was the perfect opportunity to re-air some old shows from the archives. As we've done over the course of the past week or so, we're going to share another episode of our coverage from The Mandalorian, all the way back in Season 1. We thought this would be appropriate given that The Mandalorian and Grogu is coming up in just over 2 months in theaters everywhere. So with that, we are going to go ahead and replay episode 28 of the podcast, which featured our discussion of Chapter 4 of The Mandalorian. If you're new to Podcast Stardust, you'll notice some differences in the format, which we've just gradually changed over time. You might also notice a difference in the production quality, which has improved over time, which I'm pleased to say. But please keep in mind, all of this was recorded nearly 1,000 episodes ago when we were just starting out back in 2019. So let's get on with it. The dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. Here is a replay of episode 28 of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of Chapter 4 of The Mandalorian. Alright, so we're about to discuss episode 4 of The Mandalorian, Sanctuary, but before we do, I have a Mandalorian-related story that I want to share, and it does contain a spoiler if you have completely had your head under a rock for the entire release of The Mandalorian. So you've been warned, and then we're going to get into a full spoiler discussion of the show. But the day after Thanksgiving, I got to go see the Dallas Stars versus my hometown St. Louis Blues here in Dallas. Nice. And they have a hockey player on the team named Alexander Radulov. And as they typically do during breaks and play and intermissions and such like that, they have like kind of entertainment on the Jumbotron. Mm-hmm. And they had a segment called Rad or Sad with Alexander Radulov. And so the idea is they'd show something, and then whoever the contestant is had to decide whether or not Alexander Radulov was going to decide that was rad or sad.
Okay.
And cool. So it just so happens, and I couldn't believe they did this, that that segment that they showed on the Jumbo screen was the reveal of Baby Yoda from the end of episode 1 of The Mandalorian.
Oh boy. That is surprising.
Yeah. So, the show had been on for 4 weeks at that point. So, okay. I mean, at this point in the United States, you don't have Disney Plus. It's kind of on you if you aren't current, and it is all over social media. True. But I looked at my boys and Beth, and I was just like, I cannot believe that they're showing this on screen. Mm-hmm. So do you want to guess whether or not Radulov found that rad or sad?
Well, if he's like 99.9% of the entire human population, I would think that he would have said that it was rad.
Yeah. In fact, he said that was the most rad thing ever. So it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. And my Blues won, so go Blues. But yeah, a lot of fun. But so that was completely unexpected. Star Wars is in fact everywhere. But
you're not kidding.
So
Mandalorian is bringing everybody together too. I'm telling you what.
Well, is in fact the most in-demand television show on the planet right now. I don't know if you've seen any of these stories, but it was in Forbes just yesterday that the demand for The Mandalorian has overtaken Stranger Things dominance.
I did see that. I didn't see it in Forbes, but I saw it somewhere, either on Twitter or something. Maybe Forbes was the one that was responsible for the information, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there's been some doubt after Solo how big a deal and how popular a product Star Wars is. And I think the Mandalorians demand has kind of put that argument to rest. So that was interesting to see. This has been their marquee attraction to the platform, and it
Mhm.
seems to be paying off for them. So
Well, and what's really I don't wanna say crazy necessarily, but, this is a storyline that a lot of fans, even in the Star Wars fandom, are not really all that familiar with. There was still a lot of
right.
discussion even before it came out that, is this about Boba Fett? Is this, and people who were not even into Star Wars are absolutely loving the show.
Yeah, and I think it also goes to speak volumes about exactly how iconic the Mandalorian armor is. Because this isn't Boba Fett, but that
Mhm.
look in Mandalorians and Boba Fett definitely is an iconic image from Star Wars. And I think there's been some debate and some question about that, but I think a lot of the attraction for the show is that iconic armor.
Mhm. It's true. And
Yeah.
even I saw something on Twitter where someone had, likened I think is it the Bud Light guy that looks almost like a Greek
Yeah.
warrior? And someone said, "What, are they stealing this from The Mandalorian?" And it's like, "No, they've had this for a long time actually now," but I think people are starting to kinda see the connection
Yeah,
between
that
the
whole
Mandalorian.
campaign started off as Dilly Dilly and now it's Bud Knight.
Yes!
So, yeah,
Midnight,
interesting.
that's what it is, yes.
Right, and Bud Knight Platinum is what so
Mhm.
anyways, we're not sponsored, but maybe we should
No.
be.
Yeah,
Alright,
exactly.
well, let's get into episode 4, which is Sanctuary. Jay, this was written by Jon Favreau, of course, as they all were, and it was directed by our second female director, Bryce Dallas Howard. Do you wanna go ahead and give us a summary of the episode?
I would love to. The episode opens on a farming village on the planet Sorgan getting ransacked by raiders. Coincidentally, the Mandalorian decides to lay low on Sorgan with the child because it is rural, lacks industry, and has no starport. When he arrives on the planet, he meets Cara Dune, a former rebel shock trooper, who mistook him as a bounty hunter tracking her down. After a brief fight, they go their separate ways, and the Mandalorian plans to depart Sorgan. However, villagers offer to hire him for protection, and the Mandalorian accepts and then uses their money to hire Kara for assistance. The village quickly welcomes the Mandalorian and the child, and a young widow, Omera, plays the role of their hostess. Kara and the Mandalorian are forced to train the village to fight and defend themselves as they discover the raiders have an ATST. The raiders and their ATST are subsequently defeated, but when it is discovered that a bounty hunter has tracked the child down to the village Sorgan, the Mandalorian is forced to leave with the child despite a growing affection between himself and Omera.
Yeah. So this was a good episode, like they've all been. It was a good
Mhm.
episode. I'll be upfront, of the 4 episodes, this was my least favorite, but again, that's like saying which is your least favorite child. It was really good. What was your overall thought of this episode?
It definitely took on a different tone. We heard a lot more dialogue from the Mandalorian in terms of what he was thinking and feeling and being open with other human beings, kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Right.
So it was, in some ways, it almost kind of felt, I don't want to say out of character, but as we get into this discussion, I'm sure we'll talk about maybe why it took on this tone that it did. I did enjoy this particular episode. It was a nice contained kind of episode, which definitely left us with a lot more questions about certain people and about maybe where things are going to go from here. But it also kind of opened us up a little bit more to some other things as well.
I have to agree with you on the dialogue thing. I felt like the way the Mandalorian was talking in this episode was a lot more expressive, was a lot more thoughtful than he typically spoke in the past. I felt like a lot of his speech in prior episodes, not wholly, but at least partially, was he spoke when it was necessary,
Hmm.
or he used the minimum amount of words to get his point across. That he didn't use 6 or 7 words when 2 would do. And
Hmm.
I felt like he was a little bit more verbose here. So that was a slight difference. Part of that could be attributed to the circumstances, but I feel like it even started at the very beginning of the episode when they first land on Sorgan. First, he's talking to the child.
Hmm.
Yes, and that was precious, the beginning
It
of the episode
was.
where so the child is sitting up on the control panel and pressing buttons. The first one doesn't really do anything. The second one doesn't do much, but then he hits that third button and it caused the whole ship to shudder after the Mandalorian told him to stop pressing buttons. And it was kind of that innocent child. It's like keeping an eye on the Mandalorian, reaching over to the panel. He's not looking. So he presses another button because he can't control his impulses. And so that was kind of precious. And then he moves the child over to away from those buttons that were causing problems. Then they land on the planet and they get into the restaurant / cantina, which kind of was the Mos Eisley Cantina light. There wasn't a whole lot of interesting characters there, but he's getting food for the kid, even after he'd told the kid to stay on the ship. That didn't work at all. It was a really great beginning of the episode.
Oh yeah, definitely. And of course it pulls at the heartstrings of any of us that are parents, because of course, as soon as you tell a kid not to do something, they want to do it all the more.
Right.
And yes, and it was definitely very precious. He just kind of picks him up ever so gently and puts him back where he wants him to be. And it's almost like a little puppy dog too. You tell it to stay put, and then the next thing you know, it's right by your side and fine, we'll go. Well, just stay out of trouble kind of thing. But yeah, I like that Mos Eisley Cantina light. That was a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And in some ways too, it was almost like the marketplace from the Phantom Menace, where we first
Yeah.
see Sebulba. So there was a little bit of that kind of feel, since it was kind of more of an outdoorsy, kind of cantina as well.
Right. And this is where we meet Cara Dune. And he notices her sitting over against the wall. And he asks the waitress / bartender, hey, what's the story on her? And when did she show up? And and his obvious concern is this is someone there to track down the child.
Mhm.
It goes unspoken, but then it turns out she's been there for a week. And when in a flash, she's not there anymore. So he follows her outside of the bar and pays the waitress to watch the child, which
Mhm.
we'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
And so, he uses that really great technology where he is tracking the heat of her footsteps.
Oh yeah, that's
And
cool.
yeah, and so suddenly they end and then she attacks, and their fight, which was pretty cool, ends
Mhm.
up with them both drawing guns on each other, and then we get the child slurping his soup, just kind of watching what's going on. It's just the wordless child, and it'll be interesting when this child actually ever speaks, if it does on the show, how
Mhm.
that'll change its impact. So, what did you think of her introduction?
Oh, man. I've been waiting for this, since day one, ever since we got to see her at Celebration and talking about Cara Dune, and she definitely did not disappoint. And I was reading an article, I believe it was in Variety. It was an interview with Bryce Dallas Howard, and they were talking about how physical she is. And they said at one point when she was doing one of the fight scenes that they thought the guy was on a wire, because it was actually Pedro Pascal's stunt double at that point. And they thought the guy was on a wire, and no, it was just her kicking him that hard.
Yeah.
So, and just the way that when that initial fight, when he fell backwards on his shoulder blades, I thought, "Oh, that's gotta hurt." And of course, the move that sparked all of the memes on the internet of the sipping of the soup
Yeah.
was just, as you said, without words, was absolutely adorable. I did see something that was posted. They had an interview with some of the Rise of Skywalker cast, and they asked them what they thought that Baby Yoda's first words were going to be. Have you seen this one yet?
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, and it was really funny because, at one point, Oscar, Isaac said, "Wait, I haven't even seen this yet."
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he hasn't even seen The Mandalorian. He's seen pictures and that kinda thing, but, and of course, Anthony Daniels said his first words would be, "I love C-3PO."
Of course they would.
But yeah, this whole scene was awesome, except I was a little concerned about him just kind of allowing the waitress to watch the child. That was kind of weird to me, but yet I
Well,
guess it was the lesser 2 evils, perhaps.
he's not a father when it comes down
No.
to it. I mean,
No, he's
he's
not.
got no experience with this. He's got this child that he's taken because he couldn't bear the thought of it falling into the hands of the Empire. I mean,
Mhm,
he was orphaned as a kid himself, and it was the separatist battle droids that killed his parents. And really, that was I don't know what he knows about that whole machinations of the Emperor setting this whole thing up.
mhm,
But regardless, this idea that he's going to turn over a kid that is an orphan, as far as he knows, when he was an orphan himself, for some experimenting or whatever, I could see why that caused an issue for him, where it
mhm,
may not have been for other bounty hunters who may have had parents at home that raised them and then they just chose this profession for whatever reason.
mhm,
And so, he pays the bartender to look after the kid. And of course, the kid doesn't sit still. And the bartender didn't do a good job because she was nowhere to be seen. The child is just simply fascinated with it, whatever the Mandalorian is doing for whatever reason. And then, so, they have the fight, and Gina Carano is, former UFC fighter. She knows what in the world she's doing. She knows how to fight. I mean, I'm assuming choreography must be something new to her because she's used to just beating the snot of people. Although she did do Deadpool, so who knows? But
Sure.
but she did. She's used to beating people up, and I could see, that story you told me about the stunt double. That must have been quite an experience for him.
Yeah.
But so they get back to the cantina, and he's bought her a bowl of soup. And they're just kind of talking about her past, about how she's a former shock trooper. And then once the war ended, she got into this whole peacekeeping thing where she was protecting politicians, and she didn't like the politics, and that's not what she signed up for. So she left, and, she's laying low, but she was afraid that the Mandalorian had a bounty on her,
Hmm.
which is interesting. So I'm curious what's in her past that
Oh
may have
yeah.
led to that situation.
Oh yeah, definitely. And one thing too, even just with her look,
Mhm.
I always thought that the little mark underneath her eye was just like a birthmark or something like that. And then come to find out that it's a tattoo of a
Yeah.
rebel symbol, which I didn't realize that for the longest time. And all I could think of was, traditionally in prison, people will put a little teardrop underneath their eye if
Right.
they committed murder in prison. And I'm wondering if there's some sort of symbolism to that as almost like a tear for the rebellion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd be
That
interested to see like where she got it, how she got it, why she got it.
Yeah, well, we know we have a couple more episodes with her coming up, so maybe we may get that backstory at some point. One of the things before we move on from the cantina scene is here is that the Loth Cat.
Yes.
So when they first arrive at the cantina, and they're just kind of looking for a place to sit, the child is wandering in and looking around and looks at a Loth Cat, which growls at him, and then he just kind of backs off and then carries on with business. But nice Rebels tie in there.
Oh man, I audibly squealed when that happened. I really did. But I guess I want to know what's a Loth cat doing on this planet and not on Lothal? Who brought it there?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want.
I'm sure someday we'll get a short story that'll tell us all about that.
Yes, indeed.
So the story then picks up with the Mandalorian deciding, well, she was here first, and he's going to honor that, which is interesting because it would be so easy to write this character as the make me leave type, as opposed to, well, she was here and it's going to cause problems for me, so I'll move on. But
Mhm.
he's preparing to leave the planet when the villagers approach and say, hey, we saw you land. You're a Mandalorian, so you must be a mercenary. The village has taken up a collection. We want to pay you for protection. And he's initially reluctant to do it until they mention that, they traveled all day to get there from the middle of nowhere.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what he was looking for, was an isolated place where he could lay low.
Uh-huh. And
And
that's
then
what
he
gets in there for sure.
Right, and then he takes their money and uses it to hire Cara Dune,
Mhm.
in order to help him with this. So, we're getting into basically the Seven Samurai, or the Magnificent Seven, which is the
Yes.
westernized version of that. Did this remind you of anything that we'd seen in Star Wars before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking about Onderon here. We're talking about the Saw Gerrera, Stila Gerrera, that whole storyline where they taught them how to defend the planet.
Uh, there's that, and
Mm.
I was thinking about the season 2 episode Bounty Hunters, when Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka wander into a village that looks like it's deserted at first, and they encounter
Yeah.
Sugi,
Uh-huh.
and that episode is dedicated to Kurosawa, because
Oh, yeah.
and so, I mean, it is, and this is essentially a remake of that. And so it was just, and that Dave Filoni is an executive producer on this series and a close advisor to Jean Favreau, from everything we've heard. So as much as I like this episode, it was just interesting that Star Wars kind of retreading that ground to me
Mhm.
with
And it
this,
was
because
yeah, so Seven Samurai too. I mean, you're talking about a rice farming village, and it's just almost exactly the same with this krill that they use to brew the spatchka.
uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost just
Yeah.
identical, yeah.
Right, and I'll be frank, I thought the episode of the Clone Wars was better than this. I mean, this is still really good, but
Mhm.
if given the choice, I've watched this episode 4 times, and after I watched this the first time, the first thing I did was rewatch that episode of the Clone Wars, and I've watched it twice. since then. I made my wife and kids watch it too. It's like, does this seem familiar too? And they all kind of like, yeah, it does. And then I put on the episode, and like, oh yeah, here it is. So,
I need to go back and watch that one myself because actually I forgot all about that one. I was so keyed in on the whole Onderon arc in my head that I completely forgot about that one with the bounty hunter.
well, and there's a lot of similarities, and we're just going to kind of skip around here at this point. But you mentioned you've got these farmers that don't know how to fight, which is exactly what we had in Bounty Hunters. The
Mhm,
Onderon arc, you had some people that were already a resistance to what was
mhm.
going on Onderon, and they were fighting already, but these farmers didn't know how to fight.
True.
Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka and the bounty hunters had to teach them how to defend themselves. And there is a scene where they are using their farming implements to train and how to fight. The same thing that happens here.
Mhm,
And so it is a very direct comparison. The difference is you have these Klatooinian raiders in this episode that are stealing the crops versus Hondo and his pirates that are stealing the, what is it called? Oh, I can't
oh,
remember off the top of my head, but they're stealing that crop from them. And where Hondo had a tank, these Klatooinian raiders have an ATST. So it's just kind of it was just a very interesting comparison to me that that the history is repeating itself here in the Star Wars. And these were very clear homages to Kurosawa's work with the Seven Samurai.
mhm, definitely. And where in the heck did they get the ATST anyway? Like, where did that even come from?
Yeah, that surprised the Mandalorian and Cara Dune. The only thing I could think of is with this being a few years after the end of the war with the Empire, that there's this type of salvage around. Whether they went to Jakku and found one that was wrecked and then repaired it, or someplace else that had been a battlefield and just scavenged it. I suspect if you look hard enough, you can find this stuff in the galaxy at this time.
Mhm. Oh, I'm sure you probably could. And how about the red eyes? That was pretty.
Yeah, that
Like,
was
how did that,
interesting.
yeah, like, where did that even come from? Although that same article that I referenced earlier with Bryce Dallas Howard, she said that she drew a lot upon her experiences with Jurassic World and that
Mhm.
she wanted it to seem very prehistoric, very dinosaur-like, and I definitely think that she achieved that through the direction because you did kind of feel that, especially when it was almost going to step into the trap, but then kinda backed off.
Well, when it came to the trees, it was
Yes.
very much like the
Oh,
T-Rex in
yeah.
Jurassic Park and Jurassic World coming out of the trees, and I was wondering if it was really being piloted or driven by one of these raiders or if it was automated at this point.
Yes, me too. Okay, thank you. I'm glad
Yeah.
I'm not the only one.
So, well, one of the other dynamics of this episode was the Mandalorian's relationship with Omira, which is the young widow. She had the daughter, Winta. Over the course of the episode, there's an affection that develops there. And in a throwaway line, by the end of the episode, you know that the Mandalorian and Cara Dune have been in this village for weeks because the Mandalorian says something along the lines of, that event that happened a few weeks ago, word's going to travel fast. I can't stick around. What did you think of this relationship? Did you think the Mandalorian was going to get his helmet removed here in this episode, or what was going to happen there?
Well, part of me thought maybe, but then, the reality of the situation kind of took hold of my brain and I thought, no, it's way too early for that. It's not going to happen. But yeah, the whole thing was very interesting. And I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that we know now through the flashbacks that he had that he was part of a family, that he was
Mhm.
broken up from his family and that he's searching for family. I mean, and I
Right.
think that that's one of the big reasons why the child has become so special to him is because he sees perhaps a lot of his own orphan self, in this child. But it was kind of interesting, again, kind of getting back to the whole idea of all of the dialogue, that he was really open with her very quickly. And he almost felt, again, like this connection with her. And she asked about, how long have you worn it, or when was the last time you took it off? And he's like, yesterday. And she said, no, in front of others.
Right. Right.
And he said, since I was about their age, referencing to the children. But yet, when she brought him the food, you could see him take I thought, "Oh, why is he doing it right there? Like, he's right in front of the window."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they could look right up and they can see him. So, is it almost like he did that on
To
purpose?
me, it was a savvy move that he knew people that those kids were going to be engrossed with the child and they weren't going to be looking back where he was. And so he was safe doing it. As much as it's a psyche type of a thing for the Mandalorian, I also think it is a plot driven thing, which
Oh,
is that
sure.
we got to see it was a very well framed shot. And that's my big criticism of this episode is that some of the angles and the camera and the cinematography was not up to par with what we'd seen in the previous 3 episodes. As good as this episode was,
Mhm.
that's why I found it kind of lacking. Is that, it was like from the shoulders down, and he puts the helmet next to him on that like kind of that windowsill where he's eating. And so he can keep an eye on the child. And yeah, it okay. So I want to bring up something about so we're talking about the helmet being removed. When did that become a rule? Because Sabine and her family took their helmets off all the time.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm wondering if it's something that happened because of the purge, that, it was something that was almost more of a thing that they did to preserve themselves, to preserve their identities.
Right.
And maybe it has something to do with the fact that, when he told her that I mean, did you get the feeling that he wasn't born Mandalorian? There was a line that he said in there when they took me in.
Yeah,
You know
I'm
what I mean?
still yeah, I'm still curious about that, and I think that's to be and I think it's a possibility. I'm not decided
Uh-huh.
one way or on this the other, and it's interesting because in Legends, the Mandalorians were rebuilding with whoever wanted to be one at that
Mhm.
point. You just
Mhm.
kind of had to devote yourself to that way,
Right.
and then their new canon story is I don't want to say muddled necessarily, but we had Mandalorian culture at the time of Rebels, which is well after the Clone Wars.
Mhm.
And there was
True.
Mandalorian issues, and we had some Mandalorians that had pledged themselves to the Empire. We had some Mandalorians that were resisting the Empire. And
Mhm.
so the question I think we need answered is when was this purge that we're talking about? And
Exact
what exactly did that mean? Because they make it sound like the purge happened when this Mandalorian was a kid. Well, that would have been at the Clone Wars time because there was all those battle droids around. That
Mhm.
was the Separatists, but I don't know that that's necessarily what they had in mind. It's a little unclear. It's kind of hard to put this together. So I'm hoping between the second half of this season of Mandalorian and the upcoming season of the Clone Wars that we get an answer to this.
Mhm. Definitely. And one thing that we had talked about before too with this whole muddling of the rules kind of thing is just the difference between an animated series and a live action series too. And it could be, as you said, just simply plot driven.
Mhm.
And another thing with that too, with the whole way that Mandalorians see family, as you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be bloodline. It's
Right.
whoever is willing to devote themselves. And so perhaps, this could be something that, now that we have Paz Vizsla in the storyline, that maybe this is kind of part of that house rule, with the
Yeah.
foundlings and everything, that maybe that's the rule that they have come up with that is different from what we've seen in the past, and it does have something to tie back into the purge and the reason why they're not allowed to remove the helmet. So I
Yeah.
guess, time will tell on that one.
Yeah, we could spend another 10 minutes trying to figure
Oh,
this one out.
yeah. I know.
It's very convoluted at this moment, and I'm willing to give them an opportunity to develop this. It's not bothering too much. It's just a matter of curiosity. We're starting to run out of time, so I want to address the end of this episode where the Mandalorian had decided that he can't stay here any longer, that it's not safe, that word is going to get out, that it travels fast. He knows there's people still looking for this child. And so he asks Omira to look after the kid, and she wants him to stay. She goes to take off his helmet, and he grabs her by the hands. I think he had second thoughts there for a second
Mhm.
about whether he wanted to stay or not, but he says, I don't belong here. He's dedicated himself to this is the way, the Mandalorians.
Right.
And so he's going to move on, but he realizes that his way of life is no way of life for the child, and so she vows that she'll look after him. They don't really get to finish this conversation when a bounty hunter shows up and we see the tracking fob. The bounty hunter, we get the view from the scope,
Mhm.
aims at the Mandalorian, then aims at the child. And before this bounty hunter can pull the trigger, Cara Dune shoots him in the back. So even though weeks have gone by, it is still imperative to someone that this child be tracked down and I guess eliminated at this point.
Mhm. And can I just say my heart stopped for a minute because honestly, I thought to myself, "Oh wait, no, 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 this can't be happening. Could they actually be killing off the child at this point?" Because I thought, it's definitely not out of the question. I mean, it would be a big surprise, but of course I was very, very relieved to see that it was the Gardinian. How I
Yeah,
messed that.
Garnden. Yeah. Yeah, this is the classic Ahsoka, Ezra, Kanan feature
Oh.
of Star Wars television, is that we have Star Wars content that takes place well after this, and this force sensitive child has never shown up anywhere else. And
Mhm.
so you do legitimately have to be concerned about its well-being on an episode to episode basis, because we legitimately do not know what's going to happen to it. We didn't know, when the Clone Wars started, we didn't know what was going to happen to Ahsoka. When Rebels started, it was like, well, what's the deal with Ezra and Kanan? There were no other Jedi
Mm.
around during New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and we eventually got those answers. So it'll be interesting to see where the series goes at the end, towards the end,
Mhm.
with this child and what's going to happen to it. Do they find a way of getting the bounty canceled, or do they just hide it really well, or does worse come to worse and it actually gets killed, and
Yeah.
that's what drives our second season of the show, or what happens? But we simply don't know, and there is a legitimate reason to be concerned on an episode to episode basis.
Mhm. I think, part of it is that I don't think they want to kill the child off because they're making a lot of people stand up and pay attention to this show. And it is so endearing to so many people, this little child, this little baby Yoda.
Oh
So,
yeah.
but yeah, but then again, like you said, that's why my heart stopped because you don't know the fate of this child and it is uncertain.
Yeah. And then, of course, the episode ends with Cara Dune offering to escort the Mandalorian and the child to their ship, the Razor Crest. And he declined, saying that they're not going back to the town. They're just going straight to the ship.
Mhm.
And so they depart, saying, until our paths cross again. So yeah, that's the episode. It was a good one. But what are your final thoughts and grade on this?
Well, I actually had a couple more thoughts. We were talking about the fact that there was a couple weeks that probably went by between the battle scene, so to speak, and ultimately when he decides to leave. So there's a few things that are kind of rolling around in my mind because Kara was kind of teasing him about, oh, you mean you don't want to settle down with this beautiful widow and sip spotchka for the rest of your life, kind of thing. And she even says to him that, why don't you, you can always put that back on, meaning his armor.
Right.
So I almost wonder if there was a little bit more to the relationship than what we saw with Omera during those 2 weeks. And that perhaps when she was pulling the helmet off in that part of the episode, that maybe it actually wasn't the first time she did it. Maybe this was more symbolic to say that this is gonna be the final time that she would pull it off. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I hear
So
what you're
maybe I'm
saying.
reading too much into it, but
Yeah, my take on it is that Cara Dune, just having asked that question, and what happens if you take that off? He says, I can never put it back on again.
Mhm,
And then he grabs her hands to keep her from doing it. Was that she was making her play to get him to stay at that point, and was going to
mhm,
take off his helmet. And if she had gotten his helmet off, then he was going to stay, but it
mhm.
didn't happen. So I won't discount what you were
Mhm.
suggesting as a possibility, but at least my take on it is that it hadn't happened, but he was sorely tempted
He
at that point.
was, and I still wanna know too what Omera's backstory is because she was the only one that raised her hand when he asked, "Who knows how to shoot?"
And she could.
So and she could, yeah, she was real good at it, and, obviously she's a widow, so what happened to Winta's father? And,
Yeah.
yeah, there's gotta be more to that story as well, and kudos to those kids on the show for not saying a word about Baby Yoda. I
Yeah,
mean,
no
how
kidding.
hard would that have been?
Colossally difficult. And I can only wonder if, perhaps they didn't actually see what this was. They were just told it was a child. The Baby Yoda, so to speak, was added as special effects later. I don't know. But yeah, that was, good job by the kids, like you
Yeah.
said. So
'Cause wasn't it I thought it was a puppet though, because that
I
was
think
one
it's
of the things
both. I think
that
it's both a puppet and a special effect. And I'm
okay,
wondering if, for the purpose,
maybe
because
for that
as you're suggesting, with as many people in that scene as there was,
secret.
yeah, that was their way of preserving the secret. But we'll find out someday, I suppose.
Mhm. So, I guess other final thoughts just are, that, when you said that it wasn't as maybe cinematic as some of the other ones, I think our bar has just been raised so high that
Oh
we're
yeah.
getting spoiled, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So, but I did like this episode. I mean, as far as where it ranks for me, it's definitely not my least favorite, but episode 3 is still my favorite of all of them, but this one definitely had a lot of really great moments in it. And I think, like I said before, that it helps us to build a little bit more into the character of the Mandalorian, gives us a little bit more insight that he's not just this cold-hearted bounty hunter, that there's so much more to him. But again, I think that that was good not to do that from the get-go. You don't want to do that on the first episode and make him seem like such a softie right off the bat. I mean, we got to see him as a bad A kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, this one, I mean, I'd still give it a solid B plus,
Yeah.
because it did do a lot of great things in here, and I loved what Bryce Dallas Howard did with with her directorial debut with all of this as well.
Right. No, I think your grade's about right. I'm giving it a B. It's not a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination, and it's just hard to give every single one of these episodes an A plus or an A, because then it's impossible to differentiate them. It was great backstory, but this was the first episode that felt like a television episode as opposed to a mini movie to me.
Mm-hmm.
When it came down to it, there was plenty of great backstory. Like I said, I've watched it 4 times. It's not that I dislike it, and but I just remember my first reaction after my first viewing was like, well, that was great. It just wasn't as great as the first 3 episodes. And so, uh, again, I don't want to come off as negative, because I really did like it. And I found that it's fun to enjoy every single time. I mean, just watching Baby Yoda sip soup as Cara Dune and
Yeah.
Mandalorian's fights coming to an is precious and priceless and worth it all. And him messing with the console is all fantastic stuff.
For sure.
So, yeah, it's a great episode. But again, I just can't help but wonder if Deborah Chow had directed this, how it would have looked, giving her experience with this type of a thing. So, but that being said, no, it was a great episode. I can't wait for episode 5. This is one of the very few shows that I am actively watching on a week-to-week basis. There's just not many shows that I can do that with, and I am eager. And as we discussed earlier, it's, the whole world is eager for it. So,
Oh yeah.
all right, there you have it. That was the replay of episode 28 of Podcast Stardust, where we're discussing chapter 4 of The Mandalorian. That was called Sanctuary. Hope you enjoyed that blast from the past here on Podcast Stardust. And if so, please consider subscribing to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We're available on pretty much all the platforms. We'd also appreciate your ratings and reviews wherever you can leave those, especially Apple Podcasts. And if you're looking for the entire back catalog of the show, the best place you can do that is over at retrozap.com, which is home to several other great podcasts. You can find Enjoy Stuff, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Case Files, and Superhero Suite are all currently active over there. So if you're looking to find us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. Jay has set up some Pinterest boards for us, so you can find us over there. And then the show is also available over on YouTube and YouTube Music in an audio format only. If you want to reach us by email, you can do that at podcaststardust@gmail.com. If you got some lengthier thoughts about whatever it is that we're covering, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're looking for some Podcast Stardust merchandise, head over to TeePublic, and I've got a link in the show notes for that. If you want to find out what Jay is up to in the world of cosplay, the best place to do that is over on Instagram with her account JSnips Cosplay. And as for what's upcoming on the show, this Wednesday we'll be resuming new programming with a discussion of The Force Awakens. It'll be part 3 in our series of that. And then on Friday we'll be getting into recent Star Wars news, and we've missed a few things over the past week or so while we've been away, so we got a lot to catch up on, and we hope you'll join us for it. So, thanks for listening to this replay of episode 28 of Podcast Stardust. Have a great week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.